century in which the impossible dream of human flight became reality. Two brothers whose invention would shrink the vastness of our world and open up the skies to exploration and discovery. From a young age, brothers Wilbur and Orville Wright were fascinated by the problem of a human being able to fly. They spent years developing a series of unpowered planes.
What the Wright brothers did, which is the reason why they're attributed to inventing flight, is that they introduced a control system which is still used today. It's a 3-axis control system where you control the plane with pitch, yaw and roll. And that was fundamental because that enabled them to have sustained and repeatable flight.
The Wright brothers first succeeded in flying a plane that was power-driven and heavier than air in December 1903.
The toss of a coin in 1903 at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, won Orville Wright the chance to be the first man in history to fly under power.
Their plane was only in the air for 59 seconds, but it was a miraculous moment in aviation history. One that many didn't believe had ever happened.
A big part of the Wright brothers' work subsequently after they invented flight was, first of all, proving it. It took them 4 or 5 years of road trips around the world, proving to people they could fly. They then had a huge amount of work to protect their patent because everyone just started copying it.
The Wright brothers shared credit for their invention, but Orville was the engineer and Wilbur the savvy businessman. An unstoppable combination. In the years after their first flight, the Wright brothers would sell their airplanes around the world.
Encouraged by President Teddy Roosevelt, the War Department opened bids for a heavier-than-air flying machine.
By 1908, they had their first US Army contract. Only 4 years later, Wilbur died of typhoid fever. In his short life, he made an immense contribution to one of the most important developments in human history. Orville would continue to work in aviation engineering, going on to become one of the most celebrated Americans of the 20th century.
If you look at where aviation's come from since the Wright brothers first had their controlled flight, it's influenced every piece of major aircraft design. When you fly in a 747 today, that only flies because of what the Wright brothers found over 100 years ago.
The feat that Orville and Wilbur Wright achieved is echoed through the 20th century and beyond. They were pioneers who unlocked the potential for space exploration and possibilities we've yet to fully realize. Today, the Wright brothers' 1903 aircraft sits on display at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. Its label reads, "By original scientific research, the Wright brothers discovered the principles of human flight. As inventors, builders, and flyers, they further developed the aeroplane, taught man to fly, and opened the era of aviation." In the final years of the 19th century, one talented and resourceful couple would stand out in the race to build a horseless carriage. Together, their innovative minds, marketing genius, and pioneering spirit would set in motion the age of the automobile.
Round about the turn of the century, horsepower for the vast majority of people still meant horses.
But the most revolutionary development of all was the horseless carriage. The automobile was to change the nation's whole pattern of living.
Carl Benz was a mechanical engineer working on the idea of the motor car when he met his wife, Bertha, in 1869. Coming from money, Bertha put up the capital needed for Carl to develop car components and secure new patents to maximize their income.
This was a time where there was what I would probably describe in patent world as a land grab period where people were thinking and inventing things all the time. You had gasoline versus diesel versus steam, and even electric and hydrogen-powered cars were being experimented with at the point which Carl Benz and his wife Bertha decided to make what they called the motor wagon.
Patented in 1886, Carl Benz staked his claim as the inventor of the first purpose-built, commercially available gasoline-powered car. Carl and Bertha were shocked to discover that no one wanted to buy their new invention. So Bertha Benz set out on a daring publicity stunt. She left a note for her husband and took a motor wagon on a 100-kilometre cross-country trip to her mother's house with her 2 teenage sons.
The reason why Bertha did that is because she realised that Carl could go away and tinker on these cars and get as many patents as he wanted, but if he didn't get the publicity, it was not going to take off.
The trip tested Bertha's resourcefulness.
And imagine this environment where you don't have any road networks, there's no gasoline stations to top up with fuel. She also had to be a mechanic, she had to repair things, there was no workshops to stop at.
She would resort to hairpins and garters for makeshift repairs, stopping in local towns to buy pharmacies' supplies of ligroin, the petroleum solvent used to power the car. Her plan was a huge success. Over the next 10 years, Benz's company would grow to become the largest car company in the world. By the time Carl Benz died in 1929, inventors around the world were taking the next leaps towards the car as it is known today. What Carl and Bertha Benz accomplished represents the best of our inventiveness and our pioneering spirit at work. They triggered a series of technological developments that would span the century and create a symbol of our lifestyles and our ideologies.
Cars were the embodiment of progress, of freedom, of individual mobility. Cars were seen as synonymous with adulthood. As soon as you turned 16, cars were part of the conversation, part of your future, part of your economic security, your work life. Everything was dependent on that mobility.
The car evolved as a symbol of industry, of affluence, and of a lifestyle to aspire to. There was Henry Ford's Model T, 15 million cars produced in a revolutionary assembly line between 1913 and 1927. The 1930s had their Buicks, the 1940s the Chrysler, then the tail-finned Cadillac of the 50s. The neat and sporty Aston Martin and Mustang that prevailed in the 1960s, Volkswagen's Combi van, symbol of the nomadic surfer's lifestyle, and the Beetle, star of feature films and trademark ride of the 1970s hippie. We recognize these decades through their most iconic cars. Car culture has pervaded our literature, our films, and the lyrics of our songs. Our reliance on cars, and through them oil, has dictated the shifting sands of politics in the 20th century and beyond, and has literally changed the face of the planet.
In the 19th century, cities were really star-shaped. They followed the railways and the tramways. But once the car arrived, you could go anywhere. And so all of those gaps between the fingers of the star or of the points of the star began to be filled up. Our cities became vast compared with those at the end of the 19th century.
The rise of the suburban lifestyle, shopping malls and supermarkets, drive-through restaurants, drive-in cinemas, all are owed to the increasing presence of the car in our everyday life. The car ended the isolation of rural life and expanded access to crucial services. When Carl and Bertha Benz set out to create a purpose-built motor car, there was no road network, and few saw the necessity of owning one. In the year 2000, over 40 million cars were produced worldwide.
In many respects, you could regard the 20th century as the great age of the car.
As we pass into the 21st century, new innovations will take that mantle. Just as unlikely to us now as the car must have been to those people in the German countryside who witnessed Bertha Benz descending on their towns, riding a smoking, clattering monster. Only time will reveal if it will shape and define our lives, and this century, as the car did in the 20th. Television, a technological advance that radically changed our lifestyles and revolutionized the way we access information. A forgotten name whose work made it all possible. When Philo Farnsworth was 15 years old, he sketched an idea to show his high school chemistry teacher. an electronic tube that Farnsworth envisioned would scan and dissect an image for transmission. This idea was the basis for electronic television. It would take until 1927 for a 21-year-old Farnsworth to gain the money and resources to put this idea into practice. On September 7 that year, he successfully made the first electronic television transmission, demonstrating it for the press in 1928.
The San Francisco Chronicle hailed him as a genius for this working demonstration of an electronic scanning television, which used basically a cathode ray tube to scan an image, turn it into little dots of light, and transmit it.
A dynamic industry employing more than 1 million. Television, an unparalleled blending of science and art, invention and engineering, private incentive and public service.
RCA, the Radio Corporation of America, was heavily invested in creating and commercializing this new innovation. In 1930, they approached Farnsworth to purchase his technology. When he refused, the company launched a series of protracted legal battles to gain ownership of Farnsworth's patents, effectively delaying the development of television for years. The court ruled in favor of Farnsworth, undisputedly the inventor of electronic television. RCA had to pay Farnsworth a fee to use his patented technology. But in 1947, Farnsworth's key patents expired, just in time for RCA to capitalize on the post-World War II television boom.
For many years, he was a little bit forgotten and to some degree pushed out of the way by the Radio Corporation of America, which really basically commercialized television. The name RCA and names associated with RCA are the ones that have tended in the past to get more recognition.
Behind the product that RCA was so effective at promoting was Philo Farnsworth's genius and pure inventiveness. A mind capable of linking the process of ploughing lines in a field with Einstein's photoelectric theory to conceive of electronic television. One of the last great lone inventors, Farnsworth was an underdog in the struggle to invent and control one of the most influential inventions of the century. With little formal education in physics, he would become a pioneer in communication technology. His work would save lives and connect the world as never before.
To many people, if you ask who invented radio, instantaneously the name Marconi comes up. And yet at the same time, and we have, as with so many inventions, a confluence of many ideas, many little techniques.
Guglielmo Marconi began working with the possibilities of wireless communication in the early 1890s. He wasn't alone. Scientists like Nikola Tesla and Alexander Popov were also experimenting in the field. But it was Marconi who, in 1901, after years of short-range tests, made the first wireless radio transmission to cross the Atlantic Ocean, defying the popular belief among mathematicians that the curvature of the Earth would make such a transmission impossible.
He combined the work of a lot of other engineers and physicists into a working long-distance wireless telegraphy system, essentially wireless radio, and was able to commercialize it.
The shipping industry almost immediately adopted Marconi's technology. A development in broadcasting technology and navigation systems that effectively ended the isolation of ocean travel.
Guglielmo Marconi. Can we estimate what the world owes to him, if only in respect of life saved at sea? His famous signal CQD was the first used for distress calls.
Just over 10 years after Marconi's first radio transmission, a terrible disaster at sea would prove once again the value of his invention. On April 14, 1912, the RMS Titanic hit an iceberg in the early hours of the morning.
The two radio broadcasters on the Titanic were actually employees of Marconi, not of the shipping line. They broadcast an SOS, and another ship came to rescue some 700 people. And I think that really crystallized just how important wireless communication really was going to be.
Over the next decade, Marconi continued to tinker with the possibilities of radio communication, connecting people around the world.
Hello, hello. It is my very great honor to announce to you that His Holiness Pius XI will inaugurate the radio station of the State of the Vatican City.
Marconi's work in shortwave radio established a system that remains the basis for modern wireless radio communications around the world. It may have been surpassed in some respects, but it still forms an essential part of our lives.
It's very easy, I think, to forget just how important radio still is in an emergency, for example. It's not television or the internet or the telephone that we can rely on, it's wireless broadcasting.
It began with a simple solution for information management, which grew into one of the most important inventions of the century, creating a more connected world than ever before. Tim Berners-Lee was working at the CERN Institute in Switzerland in 1989 when he came across a problem.
CERN is a way a microcosm of the rest of the world because it has lots and lots of people coming from all over the place. They had all kinds of different documentation systems and formats for their documents. So there was a real need to do the integration of the system. If the World Wide Web was a mold, this was a great petri dish to get it growing in.
Berners-Lee made a proposal for a new system. He would harness the networking capability of the internet, around since the 1970s, to pull information from a central point and display it on any computer.
As the name implies, Internet is a network of computers linking universities and other research centers around the United States and even across the globe.
It was clear by the late 80s, when he started on the web, that there would be massive numbers of people online. But there was no single standard, just this kind of feudal chaos of different online systems for navigating information.
In conceiving one consistent system to bring all of this together, Berners-Lee programmed the building blocks of the World Wide Web as it is known today, along with the coding language used to display, transfer, and link information.
The internet is basically the plumbing, the wires, the routers that connect computers together. The web is the program that we see and interact with that lets us find things, do things over that network. You can think of networks like the internet as connecting computers. They don't need people. Online systems like the web are navigation systems that connect people over a network.
By the end of 1990, Berners-Lee had launched his new system at the CERN Institute. The following year, it was made accessible to the public with a free basic web browser available to download.
Tim Berners-Lee's invention of the web and its success fundamentally changed the kind of online world we have.
Tim Berners-Lee devised a method for turning a network of connecting devices into the dominant means of accessing information worldwide. And he gave it away for free, to be used, expanded on, evolved, and shared by the world. It is not only the power of his invention, but also the gift he gave to humanity that made Tim Berners-Lee one of the most important figures of the information age. Inventors at the end of the 19th century were toying with the possibility of making pictures that moved. When two brothers would invent a device so important that the word cinema was derived from its name.
The scope of the motion picture is tremendous. It brings to us the life of foreign lands and strange people, the highlights of current events, history in the making.
Auguste and Louis Lumiere were photographic scientists working in their father's factory when they made the decision to start experimenting with moving pictures in 1894.
The Lumieres were inspired by the example of what Edison had done, the kinetoscope, which was the first moving picture machine. And it was actually their dad, Antoine, who saw it on display in Paris, and he said to his two sons, "You could do better." So they set to work. After about a year's experimentation, they hit on solving the problem that Edison had not been able to solve.
Edison's kinetoscope was large and heavy, limiting it to use in a studio. The peephole viewing technology meant that only one person at a time could watch the film. The Lumieres created a device that combined a camera with a printer and a projector. Small and lightweight, it provided everything that Edison had not: portability and a shared audience experience. The Lumieres also perfected intermittent movement, the action by which film moves through a projector with a brief pause between each frame, technology used to project film to this day. They first tested their new invention to film workers leaving the Lumiere factory in 1894, considered to be the first motion picture. Patenting the device the following year, they labeled it the cinematograph.
The cinematograph was an extraordinary machine. Anybody who could get hold of one did.
The Lumieres drew attention to their new invention when they held a screening of some of their films for the public in Paris in December 1895.
You see, we weren't so sophisticated in those days, and so it isn't really so surprising that when Mr. Lumiere, all honor to him and the other pioneers, showed us the first picture of a railway engine entering a country station, we nearly jumped out of our seats.
It was the first time audiences had seen moving pictures. Soon, enthusiasts around the world were buying the Lumiere Brothers' technology to make and exhibit films. The Lumieres also championed the idea that films should be toured and exhibited. And their legacy endures in the notion of cinema as a shared experience.
They knew it could be used for many different things, and they could not foresee that it would become an entertainment medium. As far as they were concerned, it was a kind of entertainment, but really more sort of scientific device for allowing people to see places they'd never been, to see things that they could never witness with their own eyes. They spread the idea that moving pictures were really entertaining, and the sort of missionary quality of them sending out these operators all over the world was incalculable. They gave people the inspiration to get involved, to join in.
From this amazing beginning, others would take the next great leaps of storytelling, stretching the possibilities of technology through techniques like montage, sound, special effects. Giants of cinema that stand on the shoulders of the Lumiere's grand invention. He was both an inventor and an entrepreneur, creating technologies that remain cornerstones of modern society, pioneering a new model for developing and monetizing inventions. Thomas Edison had been working for years as an independent inventor and entrepreneur when he made the decision to open his own laboratory. In 1876, Edison began operating out of a 2.5-story building his father built for him in Menlo Park, New Jersey. Edison's time at Menlo Park would prove to be the most important and prolific period of his life. The difference was that he was no longer merely an inventor. At Menlo Park, Edison was running a new research and development lab, where other inventors would work to solve Edison's ideas and problems until he had a viable product to patent.
Edison was a serial patenter. He had over 1,000 patents to his name. What Edison would do is pretty much patent everything he could think of, even if he hadn't invented the outcome yet. And then he had some recourse to go back if something was invented later and someone had solved a problem, say, oh, I thought of that. And he may have thought of it, but he hadn't completed it.
In the years between his first invention and his last, Thomas Edison averages a patent every other week.
Among Edison's most important patents and the most influential work to emerge out of Menlo Park was his direct current electricity. DC electricity may have eventually lost to Tesla and Westinghouse's alternating current technology, but it was an important stepping stone, one of the first sparks in the electrical age. With each newly patented technology, Edison's reputation as the world's greatest inventor grew. A reputation that persists over 100 years after he opened his first research laboratory.
To those who attribute his greatness to some mystical genius, Edison has a quick reply. Genius, he says, is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration.
I think historically now when we look back with a little bit more nuance. He was a great man, he was a great thinker and a great inventor, but often what he did was take these ideas, put them together, and turn them into a commercializable form.
Thomas Edison is most commonly remembered as an inventor, known for his role in the development of electricity, of the light bulb, his work in telephone technology, his early forays in moving pictures, and the voice recording phonograph, among many others. But his role in developing the research laboratory model has also been hugely influential.
In many ways, we can attribute the invention of the modern research and development laboratory to Edison, with multiple teams working at the same time on collaborative projects, multiple projects at the same time. And this allowed him to really put into practice a kind of industrialization of the invention process. I think that's really crucial. I mean, it's really difficult to overemphasize just how important that model was in terms of creating technological innovation on an industrial scale.
He was a pioneer of special effects in cinema, exploring the power of film to transcend the everyday world. His creativity laid the foundation for filmmaking as an art form of the 20th century. Before he discovered the world of film, Georges Melies worked in Paris as a stage magician, mastering the art of illusion. Until in 1895, the Lumiere Brothers came to Paris to screen their first films. Melies was among the audience.
When he heard about moving pictures, he was right there at the front of the queue. He was there on the first night of the Lumiere Brothers showing their new invention in Paris. And of course, the first thing that Melies said was, "Can I buy one?" Seeing that it could be tremendous as a kind of adjunct to magic performance.
A year later, Melies had bought himself a camera and was making his own films. But these were not scenes of the everyday. Melies built elaborate, detailed sets, wrote scripts, and hired actors to play out his fictional stories, exploring the technical capacity of film to create illusions, bringing the theatrical into the world of film.
In France, film pioneer Georges Méliès and his trick camera amazed and baffled American movie makers. How did he do it, they asked?
He discovered extraordinary properties of film, which really are the basis of the idea of film as magic. Film is showing us something which we can't see by any other means.
Melies was a pioneer of modern filmmaking techniques. He experimented with stop motion and slow motion. The first split screen, where actors perform opposite themselves, featured in one of Melies' films, as well as the first dissolve. He was the first to use multiple exposures to create a ghosting effect on the images.
And this principle of multiple exposure, sometimes 6, 7, 8 multiple exposures, allowed him to create the most extraordinary imagery. Things of really different sizes all appear to be part of the same frame. The texture of Melies' films is very rich, very heavily worked. It really looks like the world of the late 19th century illustration brought to life on the screen.
By the time Melies died in 1938, he had made over 500 films.
Melies has always been regarded as the patron saint of cinema as fantasy. If the Lumiere Brothers stand for cinema as documentation, what's in front of us, what's in front of the camera, Melies is exactly the opposite. And so, in many ways, Melies is extremely influential on what we regard as cinema today, especially the cinema of special effects, of fantasy, of beyond anything that we've ever experienced.
In the late 1970s, personal computers were not big business. Ruled by technology hobbyists, who freely shared information and software developments. A culture turned on its head by one man.
It's amazing that the next 20 years hold as much challenge and opportunity as the last 20 did.
Bill Gates and his business partner Paul Allen founded the software company Microsoft in 1975. In the early years, the company struggled to meet their overheads. Gates later projected that only 10% of people using their software had paid for it, making it almost impossible to keep their business afloat. Until 1980, when Gates landed a game-changing contract to build an operating system for the new personal computer being developed by computing giant IBM.
When they had hired Gates to write the operating system, they let Microsoft keep the license to it. They didn't insist on acquiring the intellectual property. And that made all the difference for IBM, for Gates, and for the industry as a whole. Because what happened was, after IBM made its PC, because Microsoft owned the operating system, it could license that out to any other company that wanted to make a personal computer. And that's how we ended up with Dell and Gateway and all the other competitors who helped bring down the price of PCs to the point where everybody could have one.
Gates' deal to retain the rights to his operating system, known as MS-DOS, helped establish personal computing as a new market.
In order to run any software on a personal computer, you need a mode of communication between that software and your computer. Most PCs come standard with Microsoft's Disk Operating System, or MS-DOS.
By 1983, 30% of the world's computers were running on Microsoft's software. The massive expansion of the company gave Gates a platform for his next great invention, the Windows operating system, released in 1985. Featuring a fully visual interface, it provided consumer-level access to the extensive functionality of a computer.
Without the operating system that it devised, and then the programs, the utilities, the spreadsheets, the word processing programs, all the things that made a computer work and useful, Microsoft helped develop.
Gates believed that properly monetizing the development of computing was the only way to ensure innovation. He created a system that still dominates computing worldwide, but his control over that system also made it possible for other computer companies to compete with IBM.
I think Gates' greatest achievement was his role in democratizing computing. In the 1950s, when the first kind of computers were built, the CEO of IBM famously said, "We'll only need about 40 or 50 of these in the world." And the thing that happened in the last few decades of the 20th century was that literally almost everyone in the world got a computer.
Bill Gates entered one century having personally made a significant impact on the role of personal computing in society. While doing so, he also built a massive personal fortune. He began the new century with a pledge to give 95% of his personal wealth to charity. A new purpose that may someday prove to be his enduring legacy. Computing technology was born in the post-World War II science boom, but in the early years, it was inaccessible to average consumers who couldn't see what role it could play in their lives, until two men would create a product that defined personal computing. In April 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak founded their company, Apple Computer. Their plan was to fill a gap in the market by building a user-friendly computer for everyday consumers.
Steve Wozniak was the technical guy and brilliant at creating circuit boards with very few components. At the time, personal computers in mid-70s were really underpowered. I mean, they were just barely capable of functioning. Being able to get the most out of them was tremendously important. And he became the engineering part of the company. Jobs was always kind of entrepreneurial and also a very strong sense of aesthetics.
Working mostly out of Jobs' bedroom and garage, they built the Apple I, followed a year later by the Apple II, a device that would become an icon of the personal computing revolution. The Apple II was unlike any of its competitors. Capable of color graphics and sound without any add-ons, but with room to add modems, printers, and disk drives, as well as beefing up its internal memory. But the success of the Apple II wasn't just about what Wozniak had designed it to do. It was also the approach to marketing the product, tapping into a huge market by helping people visualize why they needed a computer in their home.
Together, they shaped our expectations of what a personal computer is and popularized the idea that you might want one.
The next great leap Apple computer would make was the Macintosh.
Communication, of course, is more powerful a weapon than any fleet. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh.
The release of the Macintosh in 1984 brought a whole bunch of features to the personal computer people hadn't seen, the mouse, the graphical user interface. I would say it also did something quite different that every successful product seems to need, which is to make the computer cool or fashionable.
Many of us have been working on Macintosh for over 2 years now, and it has turned out insanely great.
What Wozniak and Steve Jobs had created together was critical to the rise of personal computing. Together, they made computers smaller, more intuitive, and accessible. Their Apple II is credited with readying the world for future technologies like the Macintosh, and into the new century with the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad, positioning computers as an essential part of our everyday lives.